Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of our Nuclear Revenge. In today's episode, Grandma's Revenge. The case of the franking slicer. I need to use these RSI tools? If you say so. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. Grandma's Revenge. The story was relayed to me by grandparents, so it may be embellished. I immediately have to write this down because it is the most amazing thing I have ever heard. I was visiting my grandma and grandpa to celebrate a bunch of summer birthdays together, but when I pulled up to their house, the plot to the right was completely empty. As in no stones, no base, no debris, just slightly overgrown grass. Grass, where there used to be a house. When the hellos were said and the party started, I absolutely had to know what happened, so I went to ask my grandparents, and goodness gracious, I was not expecting the roller coaster of a story they told me. A couple of years ago, my grandparents had some very unpleasant neighbors. Loud at all hours, trash in the yard, arguing with other people on the street, just absolute nuisances. It was a husband and wife, and their adult son who would come and go irregularly. The wife would get into arguments with anyone about anything, and the husband would physically intimidate the people who spoke up for themselves. They weren't sure what exactly was the deal with the son, but it couldn't have been anything good as it was well known he had been in the county jail more than a few times. The house apparently reflected the tenants, as it looked awful. It was sagging and dilapidated, loose beams and peeling paint, but nothing was ever done about it due to the guy who rented out the place being a slumlord. We'll get to him later. It all came to a breaking point one night when my grandparents returned home to find their back door smashed in and some of my grandpa's guitars missing. Now, Grandpa loves his music and has been singing and playing his whole life, so it's safe to say those guitars are not only very memorable to him, but expensive too. They of course went to the police, and after some digging they found that the guitars had been sold at a pawn shop or someplace by the son. They couldn't get the guitars back, unfortunately, but I believe my grandparents were fairly compensated since the guitars were insured. TL guitars have insurance. Given how expensive the guitars were, the theft was absolutely a felony and the son once again ended up in jail. After that, the neighbors would harass my grandparents through the fence or on their porch, meaning it was difficult for them to even sit outside. They would call them foul names, throw trash over the fence, and the husband would still try to get physical. Now, while my grandpa is a very chill and mellow guy, my grandma will take shit from noon, especially not jerks like these. So what did she do? She got the house condemned. It was easy for her to do, really. She called the local authorities, general attorney, property manager, I don't know, and they came and did an inspection, though it was clear by the outside of the house that it hadn't been properly maintained for a long time. One call led to more calls, and the property was deemed unfit to live in, which forced the rude neighbors to move out. I'm not sure what happened to them or where they went, but supposedly they were put up in a nearby hotel by the slumlord until the house could be fixed. Oh, foreshadowing. Now enter the slumlord. Of course, his tenants told him who had reported the house, so of course he's upset with my grandparents. Rather than fix the house though, he gets aggressive the first day he's there, yelling at my grandparents about how they're idiots for reporting him and how they've cost him a bunch of money and he's going to sue them and on and on. It gets to the point where the across-the-street neighbors called the local police to come defuse the situation, which they do. A few weeks pass and my grandma hasn't seen the slumlord or anyone around to fix the house. Not being one to let things go easily, Grandma starts making frequent calls to a bunch of services, reporting the house and its lack of progress. Each time, the slumlord's truck would appear for a day and then leave without changing a thing. Grandpa said he would block in their driveway, but since they stay home most of the time, it wasn't a major issue. Grandma disagreed. Finally, my grandma had complained enough that officials came out and condemned the house for demolition. This had two major effects. First, the rude neighbors were now practically homeless, since as soon as they and the slumlord ran out of money to pay for the hotel, they'd be stranded. Second, the slumlord still had to pay a shitload of fines for the state of the house. The rest is more his fault than my grandma's actions, but he would refuse to pay and refuse to show up in court, leading to a warrant being put out for his arrest. A few months ago, the demolition teams came and tore down the place, leaving the lot perfectly barren. They even removed the driveway, so now it just looks like an extension of the side yard. My grandparents were not sure of the final state of the neighbors and slumlord, but my grandma looked very pleased with herself as she finished her story. I love her so much. I can only imagine that a lot of elders have stopped caring about life and will spend their last days getting back at someone. Ah yes, an elderly person with lots of time on her hands and, seemingly, enough patience to use it. Definitely someone you want to pick a fight with. Now they just need to buy the property, since the city or county have probably seized it due to the accumulated fines. Your grandma should organize a third party to offer the slumlord a ridiculously low price for the vacant lot. After all, he's got a lot of fines to pay, and your grandparents need a bigger yard. It'll be seized by the city for any unpaid fines/taxes. They put a bid on it at a sheriff's sale. Surely the buyers of the guitars would be required to return them as stolen property. The pawn shop would face criminal charges for handling stolen goods. Buyers would get their money back from the pawn shop, and the son would be liable to the pawn shop for his ill-gotten gains. The case of the franking slicer. Back during the 90s in the UK, when you're in your final years of secondary education, or you could call it your GCSE years, the schools did something called workplace experience. This was basically where you find a job where you spend 2 weeks experiencing work after you leave school. Even then, I found it pointless for many reasons. In my case, I couldn't find a job that would accept me, so the school went looking and found one for me. To make note, I wasn't the only one the school had to help on this. Well, the school found me a placement in the office at a dedicated mechanics education school. Basically, it was a mechanics shop like any other, but where the mechanics working on your car/van are students training for their mechanics qualifications. While I was there, I wasn't allowed to do much. Like they didn't want me there at all, so I was given menial tasks. Deliver documents to offices next door, fetch coffee, use the franking machine, and other stuff. It was like they just volunteered me to do stuff they didn't want me to do. However, when it came down to it, it was mostly simple, easy jobs. Apart from fetching coffee from the staff kitchen. They had this little room which was called the mail room. It wasn't big. I could stand in the middle of the room and touch all 4 walls. There was a desk attached to the wall and a shelf above it with a bunch of mailing bags. The usual stuff you'd find in a mail room of an office. In this case, there was franking machine in the middle of the desk with 2 baskets to one side used for placing mail ready for franking. One for first-class postage and the other for second class. For those not in the know as to what a franking machine is, you'd have better luck looking them up, but I'll give you the footnote. When you get mail and you see in the top right printed markings instead of a postage stamp, that is where the franking machine comes in. Businesses can go to Royal Mail in bulk by postage or whatever. I'm not exactly sure how it works. The franking machines print those postage details onto the envelopes instead of a person going through the hassle of removing postage stamps from the stamp books and making sure to stick it in the correct place on the envelope. With the machine, the job is done quickly. So down to the malicious compliance. As you have figured out, this compliance was with the franking machine. I was taught how to use the machine. It was already pre-programmed with what to print. All I had to do was select whether to print first or second class postage. Then I would slot an envelope into one side like I was swiping a bank card to pay for groceries. After the envelope enters the machine by a certain amount, the machine activates and pulls the envelope through. I soon found out that this machine had a temper. Sometimes it would take its time pulling the envelopes through. Other times it'd yank the envelope out of your hand and shoot it against the wall. Surprisingly, with an intact, properly printed frank mark. One day, I was told, go do the mail, and so I did. I slotted an envelope into the machine and it did its usual. However, with one new result. It had sliced open the envelope. As in, you can remove the letters etc. from inside the envelope like someone had just opened their mail with one of those letter opener knives. I grabbed the envelope and went to my boss. The following conversation isn't exact, but you get the idea. Boss, what do you want? Surely you haven't finished with the mail already. Me, no, I've barely started. Boss, then go and finish it. Me, I can't. There's a problem with the franking machine. Boss, there's always a problem with it. Just go back and finish posting the mail. Me, but it's slicing the envelopes open. I tried to show her the sliced envelope. Boss, ignoring the envelope, she said, just frank the mail, will you? Or is that too difficult of a job for someone learning how businesses work? Me, okay, but it's not my fault if something bad happens. I turned and returned to the mailroom. Along the way, I grabbed some paper and wrote on it that I apologized for the damaged envelopes, that the machine was slicing them open, and that my boss refused to listen to me about it. Then I proceeded to put envelope after envelope through the machine. Every one came out sliced open. I must have done a couple hundred of them for first class alone. Once done, I didn't put them in mail bags. I just neatly piled them at the side of the machine with the letter on top. About half an hour before the end of my shift, someone came into the office carrying several of the envelopes and my letter. I quickly found out that he was the boss of the business, as in the highest position. He'd apparently stepped into the mailroom with a few of his own letters for franking and found the pile. After arguing with my boss, and me being blamed for it like I was snooping into every envelope to see what I could find. So I volunteered to show what was happening. My boss and her boss grudgingly accepted my offer, so I grabbed a sheet of plain paper from the nearest fax machine and a fresh envelope. Putting the paper in the envelope, I asked Big Boss to seal it as confirmation that it's sealed. I then led them both to the mailroom. At arm's length so they can both watch me, I gently slotted it into the machine until the machine took over. Sure enough, the machine coughed out a freshly sliced envelope. Then my boss tried telling me off for not telling her, only for me to say that I tried, but she refused to listen. I only did what I was told. I was let off in the end. The next day, the machine was unplugged, so nothing was getting posted. The day after that, there was a couple of piles of postage stamp books, which of course I had to stick on the envelopes. When I returned for my second week there, I was shown how to use a brand new machine. This new machine was a dream. Just imagine you had spent 10 years driving the same car until it was falling apart, and then you finally upgraded to a new car that is so new, the mileage on it was still double digits. Until I left that place, I was still given menial tasks, but my boss never ignored me again. A few years after leaving school, that business closed up shop. The building then got taken over by a big brand tire company that also did MOTs, alignments, etc. As a manager, this kind of behavior always mystifies me. It's so easy to just wait 30 seconds and get pissed off at stupid after you've verified it's stupid. Also, teaching is fun. Even if I had someone specifically hired or acquired for free to do the odd jobs, they should get started with PPE, SDS, safety procedures in between stamps or staples or what have you. A high schooler can learn those things, plus basic vehicle services like oil change, and leave with extremely useful life skills. Also, teaching is fun. Even if I had someone specifically hired or acquired for free to do the odd jobs. I have been trained at jobs by two very different kinds of people, and this is certainly one of them, winky face. Frankly, my dear, this story gets my stamp of approval. It was a first-class joke, as it pushed the envelope. Franking machines even now can be temperamental AF. I work for a third-party business that handles outgoing first-class mail, and the main franking machine we use to meter mail, just over a year old, peels strips off the backs of envelopes. Started doing it about 2 months in. It's been fixed, which of course means it's now worse. Quite a few businesses these days in the UK outsource their printing from mailing to independent companies. Basically, they email documents to the printing company who prints the letters, puts them in envelopes, and then ships them off. You can see this on the envelopes as the return address is usually the printing company. I don't want to downgrade your experience by any means, but it is possible that this was a configurable feature of the old machine. Say you get a bunch of mail delivered that day that needs to be opened quickly. You turn OFF the franking stamp and turn on the little slicing knife and feed the mail through it. Minutes later, everything is opened cleanly. I worked on those machines 60-ish years ago. There were all sorts of esoteric controls for first, second, third class mail, third class suppress the date, since there was no delivery guarantee at that class, for example. Possible? I'd like to imagine that the franking machine sat right next to the automatic letter opener, and letters came flying out of one and into the other. Ideally, there would also be a paper shredder in the very small room. I need to use these RSI tools? If you say so. Backstory. This happened quite a few years ago. I was the systems administrator for a small startup media design company. We had approximately 14 people on staff, and it was a very relaxed atmosphere. Just for context, a little thing about me. I'm a bit of a geek/nerd, and the computer also takes a bit part of my personal life. It fuels some of my biggest hobbies. Not just gaming, but I also enjoy messing with digital, audio, 3D graphics, and as can be seen by this post, I also enjoy online communities. Most importantly, I really enjoyed my work, and thus noteworthy, it wouldn't be the first time when I took some work home with me. That is, I had remote access to our small network, so when something needed to be done, I could often do so from home. And before we continue, I'd also like to emphasize that I truly believe in the good intentions of the bosses. They were really just trying to look after us best as they could. Our main Carl, Otto. The big project/RSI training. The company was run by two bosses, but as work piled up for them equals assumption on my part, they started to rely on an office manager. And this dude would sometimes seriously overstate his own importance. At the time of the story, the company had closed a deal with none other than the city council to set up a digital meet and greet with the council members. This sounds horribly trivial right now because online chatting facilities are pretty common these days, but back then it was all still quite new. Because I spent a large chunk of my private time online on IRC back then, it didn't take long for the bosses to decide that I should fully handle the technical details of the whole thing and of course closely work together with our designers. The whole interaction would take place on a custom-built website with chat interface, and as said, an IRC server as backend. In other words, visitors would use a website to chat using said website, but the whole thing basically ran on an IRC server. Normal users couldn't access that server directly, but obviously I could. I still remember to this very day because I got official permission to use IRC at work, so obviously I kept some of my favorite public chats around as well. RSSI equals Linux-based IRC client was awesome like that because it could easily connect to multiple servers at the same time. But I digress. The incident. Because the bosses wanted everything to be perfect, they decided to hire an ergonomic specialist who would advise all of us staff members on how to prevent RSI. In case you're not aware, this stands for repetitive strain injury, which is basically a muscle issue caused by, usually, repetitive motion, and a whole plethora of other things. See its Wikipedia article right here. We all followed along and all of us got some new equipment to use our computers more safer. Cushion pads in front of the keyboard, different chairs with arm legs, a mandatory stress ball, and some other things. Now, despite the fact that I was very skeptical about the whole thing, I still decided to keep an open mind about it and try things out to see where it would lead. I mean, couldn't hurt, right? Well, wrong. After 2 days, I started to notice problems at home. My hands began to hurt. I started getting issues with typing, and me and some online friends got creamed at a Quake tournament, which for a large part, but not all of it, was because of me. No, I wasn't some awesome star Quake player. Never have been, but I could still hold my grounds. But that evening, I totally sucked. It was bad. Really bad. Of course, I had a good hunch what was causing all this, so the next day at work, I dumped all those RSI gizmos into a closet and went back to the way things were. One of the bosses did briefly ask me about it, but I explained that it just wasn't working out for me and that I was actually starting to get issues. He fully understood, but for some dumb reason, the office manager didn't. You have to use those tools, otherwise you're wasting company money. As I suspected, things got a lot better for me, but later that afternoon the officer manager noticed what was going on and he threw a fit. What in the world was I thinking? Did I have any idea how much money the company had spent on all those improvements? And never mind about me, what if other people needed to use my computer? Then they needed those aides to be there, To which I commented that as far as I was aware, no one was allowed behind my PC because my network security clearance was practically the same as the boss's. Because of my support role, I had full access to everything. If I wanted to, I could easily pull up all our financial records, for example. Something that actually happened at one time when an external accountant made a visit and needed some of our data. My boss asked me to help them out and thus cleared me do all of that. I still remember because it made me very uncomfortable, despite barely getting to see anything. Anyway, the manager didn't like that comment. First, I figured that I would just leave those RSI gizmos lying at the side of my desk, but no. He insisted that I just didn't understand what was good for me and that I had to use those tools. So, I complied, though very carefully. That day, my speed at getting work done for the big project plummeted, big time. For obvious reasons, I was also no longer doing anything from home anymore. In fact, I had excused myself on IRC and said that I would be taking a break because of the way things went and would severely limit my overall PC time at home as well. Books, fantasy novels, Dragonlance FTW, and TV can also be fun. But as I had expected, my complaints became worse. Houston, we have a major problem. After having spent a whole weekend with barely any private PC interaction, things got from bad to worse that next Monday at work. Even typing became a chore for me. Me, who can type blindly with two hands for fingers at a very decent speed and without having followed any typing courses. So I took the afternoon off and went to visit my local doctor. His first comment when I described my problems and my theory as to what was causing all of it equals, "Yeah, you're not the first one with such issues. There seem to be quite a few companies active right now who claim to help prevent RSI, but in fact they're merely fueling a sales model." When I didn't fully understand what he was talking about, he told me that in his opinion that ergonomic expert was only in it for the money to sell his merchandise. According to my doctor, the guy should at the very least have realized that if I was already using computers so intensively, both at work and at home, that I was probably already aware of the importance to rest your arms. Instead of dismissing all that, he should have given that some extra thought and anticipate for it. So the doctor wrote me a prescription. First, an ointment to help relax my wrist and arm muscles. Then a mandatory 2-week break from work to help recover from having developed mild yet disturbing symptoms of RSI due to unprofessional conduct. The big project was next week, and we weren't even near ready. I honestly felt bad for my boss the next day when I told him what had happened while handing him my doctor's note. Sad face. He was not happy, he was fuming. No, not directed at me. I had his full support and sympathy, but he still turned red and stomped off to the office manager's desk, with me following him. Of course, the office manager denied everything. I had simply misunderstood him. No way would he demand something as dangerous as that. This is when I learned 2 things. 1. Always document things to cover your butt. Something I obviously hadn't done. 2. Working in small companies rules. See, while the bosses had their own office, the rest of us sat at tables in a large room, spread over 2 areas. So the moment the office manager started denying things, some of my coworkers immediately stepped up. "Oh, does that mean I can finally throw this thing in the trash then without getting fired?" My colleague and former friend sneered. Former contact simply watered down over time. The boss turns to me. "Shell, why don't you go home and rest? No need to get involved with the upcoming drama," to which I nodded and thanked him. But I also told him that I would be contacting them later that week to try and help sort things out. I wasn't sure, but still saw a possible way out of the upcoming doom scenario. Aftermath. As much as I wanted to ignore the whole thing and just do my own thing, I decided to stick with no PC time at home for the next 3 days just in case. Thursday evening, I hopped back online for a short hour and did some asking around. First, I called my colleague/friend from work to ask him about the status of the project, in specific if the designers managed to finish the website. Then I reached out to a dear online friend of mine who also happened to be an Undernet IRC operator, and I asked him if there would be a possibility to link our website front-end directly to his server using a dedicated port connection for security purposes. See, the only reason we purchased a commercial IRC server was to comply with certain regulations, security reasons being one of them. Now, My idea obviously wasn't fully on par with all of that, but if you can't trust an official undernet server to be safe, then who can you? Winky face? Yeah, that was also meant as a bit of a joke. But what you don't know can't hurt. Eh? Or something like that. So I contacted my boss the next day and told him about my plans and that there would still be a way to salvage the whole thing. Though he might not fully like how I was planning on doing that, tongue sticking out, to which he, jokingly, responded that he was already pissed that I was gone for 2 weeks, so how much worse could it get? Well, the next week the online chat session worked perfectly. We basically set up a dedicated chat channel. My IRC op friend set up an X instance to keep things safe and quiet, and the chat attendance was quite decent. The week after that, when I got back to work, I did have a small run-in with the office manager who told me that he wasn't happy that I hadn't just told him what the problem was. But I decided not to get into that again and simply responded that he also could have chosen to trust my judgment when I told him I didn't want to use those RSI gizmos. We kept things cordial, but according to my friend, the manager never seemed to dare and question any of my decisions again. I really don't know for sure, but he was convinced. I even joked about it that I would try and keep it in mind when I was going to ask for vacation leave, winky face. Which never happened, of course. And there you have it. I have done the UK DSE, Display Screen Equipment, Assessor's course. It covers the whole user environment, not just the screen. We had a discussion on the uselessness of most items labeled as ergonomic. One example was a pair of ergonomic shorts, UK knee-length cargo, not underwear. Always amused me that we had to do our DSE assessments regularly, in a hot desking environment. Think 30 people using 10 desks. It was the NHS too, so all the furniture was the cheapest available and none of the chair adjustment mechanisms worked for longer than about a month. They also refused to buy headsets for the phones, in a community team where you spent much of your office time on the phone. In my office, one day we were all given new chairs and hauled the old ones off. I immediately started experiencing back pain and was told that all I needed to do was adjust my chair properly. I never did figure out the magic adjustment. I was talking to the building manager and he told me that he had saved some of the old chairs locked away in a storage room. He gave one to me and my back pain went away. I bought an area on cheap after the 2001 collapse and I was working on a second degree. Still have it. Still the only chair I can sit in Form 8 HRS, and my back feels better at the end of the day. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you in the next video.